My name is Ryan Booth, and I am brand new to YouTube. You can see there's some, I have a few videos on my channel below, but they're really like street photography in motion, let's call it. I've always been a huge fan of kind of documentary photography and street photography, particularly black and white documentary photography, but it's just a hobby of mine because actually my day job is directing, and not just directing, but directing commercials. And not just commercials, but like commercials for TV, like, for Nike and for Ford and Peloton and Porsche and Adidas and all kinds of amazing kind of companies and amazing kind of projects at scale. It like directing commercials is an incredible way to grow as a filmmaker, to hone your craft. But ultimately my goal is working towards long form film and TV projects. I want to direct my own films. I want to be a part of, directing TV shows. But it takes a really long time to get there. My first feature has been in development for almost 5 years now. And so there's, on any project, even directing a commercial, there's these long periods where you're pitching, where you're, working on treatments, where you're in pre-production or post-production, that it just can feel like you've spent a lot of time on something but haven't made anything. And so I think for me, these kind of the way that time elapses and the weeks turn into months, which turn into years, I can get really twitchy and feel like I haven't made something. And so oftentimes street photography is my way of making something when I'm in the middle of other projects. It's not what I do for my job. This is not how I get paid. I have no clients. I'm typically not selling prints or doing anything from the work. It is literally just for me to go out and create. But I don't just go out and shoot. I make a plan. I make a game out of it almost. I pick one camera. I go to one location. And I shoot for 1 hour. So those are the kind of pillars of how I approach street photography. One camera, one location, 1 hour. Now, I happen to live in New York City at the moment. I'm from Texas, but I live in Brooklyn. My office here is in Dumbo, but oftentimes when I go shoot, I'll cruise across the bridge and head into Manhattan, pick a different neighborhood, take one camera with me, whether that be 35 mil, medium format, digital, like I have a Leica M9 with a kind of old grungy CCD sensor, all the way down to kind of digital point and shoot cameras. And I'll pick that one camera, go to that one neighborhood, spend an hour and see what I can find. So I think for me, I find that creativity really flourishes within limitations. So as this kind of palette cleansing exercise, when I'm in the middle of other projects, I go shoot a session. So that's what I wanted to talk about and show you today, is images that I did create on a recent session, one camera, one location, 1 hour. Some are good, some are bad, some, not just some, most are but I think that the point is, each of these sessions, every time I go out and shoot, it's helping me get a little bit better at the craft of visual storytelling, even if that's not a one-to-one connection between what I do for my day job and what I do for my hobbies. So let's jump into it. So let's talk about the one camera first. For this particular session, I decided to use the Fuji XE4. This is a pretty inexpensive little camera that Fujifilm makes. However, it does have interchangeable lenses. So I have a 16 mil 2.8 lens with a quarter glimmer glass filter in it, which is quite lovely for blooming highlights, which I find to be quite interesting. It's really small and it doesn't have an optical viewfinder, which is fine because I spend most of my time actually shooting from the hip. So I actually am looking down almost in this field of view here and shooting like this as I'm kind of moving around the city. I have, plenty of other cameras as well. I have a Leica M6, a Leica M9, a couple of different medium format kind of rangefinders that I'll use. I have an X-Pan and even a Polaroid 600 SE that I may go out and shoot with sometimes. But I find that each camera has its own kind of quirks and limitations, and force me to see in a particular way. So for this particular session, the 16 mil lens is really the limitation. 16 is very wide for street photography. It requires me to be quite close. Or it requires me to think about bodies in space. So the camera is the XE4. Then the one location I chose was Lower Manhattan, which Lower Manhattan is an interesting place to photograph because the buildings aren't on a grid. So the sun starts cutting through them in interesting ways, and light is reflecting and bouncing around like crazy down there. So I decided to go there and spend an hour photographing. I ended up shooting almost 400 images in that hour, which is crazy. And then I whittled that down to about 65 images that I felt like were good enough to edit. I'm not going to go into my editing technique on this particular video. That will need to be its own thing. I do get asked a lot about color grading, but I would say that'll be a broader conversation because it really has a lot to do with the filmmaking work that I do and bringing that approach to toning still images. So what I'm going to do now is show you those kind of cycle through quickly those 65 images. A lot of times I will basically sort them into images that feel like color and images that feel like black and white, and I'll whip through them real quick. In fact, I'm going to put them up on the screen here, and then I'll go through a few specifically on the iPad, and we can talk. I'll break down some of my favorites. So these are some of the images from the session. So let's go through and talk about some of these images. I'm going to go try and go a bit quickly here, but I do think some of the interesting things for me of the difference between color and black and white. This image, for instance, is this guy eating pizza sitting in front of this. I'm literally walking out of my neighborhood. This is one of the first shots I took. But what was interesting is these kind of American flags, the color on the van here, the cone here, these all felt like important. I can't tell you why, but they did. Whereas this, which I really think is kind of the best image of that sequence, with the photographs here, the old-timey photographs here, and him eating pizza in this kind of very interesting pose that's kind of mirroring some of these poses here. Like this all just felt like this was the same moment. And so black and white felt like the right move for this one. So this was an interesting photograph that I didn't kind of, it was not successful. This is actually a hot dog cart, and the reflections in the window, I missed the exposure, and basically it exposed, you just barely can see this guy. But I do think this is an interesting photograph. It almost looks like I kind of composited this face in and then dropped the opacity. It was not successful in my opinion, but if you look closely, especially on the internet, right? If this was a tiny little picture, you wouldn't really see what it is about. But, these lights and his face, these don't go with this kind of the outdoor sky and buildings. So it's interesting, at least in passing. I like shooting a lot of subway stuff in black and white. I think that's quite interesting. The way that the light kicks through and reflects off the faces. A lot of times black and white just feels appropriate for the subway. except for these, like, man, the way that the light and the color kind of blends off of, the subway cars, I think is quite interesting. So I do find that the subway car a lot of times makes me think about things in color. I love this image. So a lot of times my black and white rule has a lot to do with the fact that, like, he's in motion, he's blurry, and I missed it. I just missed the shot. I'm focused. I back focused here. I missed him. He's moving, but in kind of concert with each other, it feels quite poetic. It feels black and white. So that's not that great of a picture. Not that great. Not that great. Not that great. This is one example of kind of what I was talking about light-wise in Lower Manhattan. This image isn't super strong. It's a bit cluttered. But basically, if you zoom in here, you see the light is hitting him quite hard. It's still wrapping around his face a little bit. It's actually bouncing off of, there's a white van over here that it's bouncing off of. But these kind of hard pings here are quite interesting. This is interesting. But then it falls off. This is several stops below the kind of hard light of the sun here because it's coming down this alleyway and not hitting in here. In fact, the sunlight back over here is a reflection off of building windows on this side out of frame coming back this way. So this is reflected light, this is reflected light, this is direct light. And so this is just an interesting, what this photograph did for me was actually just said, this is an interesting time of day to be photographing. This one I love just because of the color symmetry here. Yeah, and she just looks awesome. Not this one. I tried to make this one cool and it wasn't. You've seen this photograph before, but it's nice. This one is a good example of, like, the secondary one is more interesting with this face, him kind of looking away from us, this lady in the background. In fact, that's actually an interesting crop of that image. Whereas this one is like, it's cool, but it hasn't quite landed yet, right? It's just not quite there. The scene developed, and then that's the better expression of that scene right there. Not a lot to say about this one. This one I tried to shoot the FedEx. I was waiting for the FedEx truck to leave so that this would be a kind of entirely dark background over here so that it would feel very focused on her. It started driving away, but then she got up and left anyway. So it didn't work out. Same thing. That's a failed photograph. I was waiting for her to turn. But there's that kind of interesting interaction where he's looking at her and she's looking at him and she's on the phone and I don't know, but it didn't quite work. So then I flipped around. You can see her there. That's who I had just shot. You can see the smoke here kind of backlit by the sun. This is interesting about this, but nothing else really worked. I would have had to stay here for a while, but the smoke kept disappearing. So I just snapped it and moved on. Love Pizza Guy. If I had been, if this was the movie version, I would put a light over here and hit him. He's a bit kind of stuck within the sameness of the lighting in the interior here. I would have keyed him a little bit higher than background here so that you can clamp down and really focus on him. But I love his kind of like weird reflections on his glasses and his mid-bite moment. Yeah. This lady was interesting. She literally tried to grab the camera out of my hand. I had the camera low because I had just shot this and wanted to see up here, so I was shooting quite low. And I turned around and she was coming towards me and she looked amazing. So I photographed from here, but she had seen me photographing in here, so I think she knew I was photographing and immediately like reached her hand out to literally try and grab the camera out of my hand. And I kind of pulled away and then looked at her like, what's going on? But she didn't look at me. She just kept walking, never turned around again. That was it. It was like she wasn't even mad about me taking the photograph. She just like tried to grab my camera and kept moving. But I did this a few times where, you expose for the daylight here, the direct sun, and then it makes everything fall off super dark. It's a little gimmicky. I mean, we've seen this before, but it does kind of cut out people interestingly. I think it's used well here. These people this is an interesting composition with the paying off of the sky or the stoplight here. They both got their phones up. That's an interesting photograph. That one didn't work. That didn't work. This one I tried to make it cool with the light on her face, little reflection here and a totally different light over here, but I don't know, maybe not. I love this laundry one. That just feels like an appropriately black and white image. Not great. The idea of that was cool. I should have stayed longer and figured out a slightly different version, but that hard shadow right in his face was kind of cool. This one looks really great printed, which I'll talk about in a minute. Yeah, so you can see the reflections on the building. Didn't work. Okay, this might be my favorite image from the session. This woman just is like really lost in thought. I don't know what she's thinking about. You got this great reflection under her eyes. NYPD, you see the biker over here. Whole thing's just quite interesting. Nope. That's kind of cool. I wish that there were no cars here. That would have been interesting. He was like smoking, so that was what initially drew me to this, was the reflection of the smoke and the that was kind of curling up from here. But by the time I got here, really he was like at the end of the cigarette. It wasn't really happening anymore. But it's interesting. This is classic, reflections. This is window light, the sun bouncing off the window and creating these like pools of light. I actually think the color one works well because she's wearing this jacket that's the same color, but her pants and this purple are the two kind of pops of color in this whole image. It's quite interesting. This one I loved. I had to circle twice for this image. He was very lost in thought and the light was coming through. These are all reflections. I thought I was going to get nailed on this one as well, but he was just really deeply in thought. This would have been, if I was kind of, having to recreate this scene in film, this would be very difficult to do. It would require multiple layers of light. My DP would be mad at me for trying to make this happen. This is, just through, reflected stuff in a construction zone. I like putting textures on images. This is cool. I don't know what they were handing off. There's a decent flow to this image. Your eye kind of goes from here to here to here. But it's a little messy. I think it would have been nice if they were entirely framed by that limestone. That's not that good. And then, I'm starting to work my way back now, just seeing shapes and stuff. This hug was cool. I got one in color and one in black and white. This felt nice. It was a little blurry. Got those weird cops in the background. And then there's a version where you kind of see the color. I don't know. Maybe the black and white one on this one. But, that was an interesting moment. I mean, classic. Every time I'm in the Fulton station, I shoot something like that. That feels nice too. Whatever. That's just a little joke for myself. No cash in booth. And then, this was the final image. An older lady in a wheelchair. Her caretaker's over here, sitting in the shade, and she keeps pushing her further into the sun. I wish I would have gone in and flipped around and shot directly back, like backlit her and shot this way. But I kind of chickened out, to be honest. I didn't want to bother her. But I would have gone in close and shot from the other side, just so that the sun was coming this way and my camera was there. I tend to like to put the sun. Tend to put my subjects between myself and the sun, but that's a filmmaking thing. A lot of times, photography is shot from the flat side, and then a lot of times, cinema is shot from the you backlight. But anyway, that's another conversation for another day. So those are some of the images from the shoot that I kind of selected and ended up grading. even those, not all great. There's a handful of good ones. But what I do then is I actually put them into a grid in Photoshop. And I have a Canon Pro 200 13 by 19 printer, just an inkjet printer. It was not that expensive. But I've started as a way of kind of finishing the assignment, so to speak, that I've given myself. I will actually make a couple of grids of images, kind of large sized contact sheets. I will print them out, and then they actually go over there in that black cabinet over there as a way of kind of creating an archive of my favorite street photography images in printed form. I've just found that printing makes it feel like the assignment is finished, that I've completed the thought in some capacity. So I went ahead and printed out some of my favorite black and white and color images, and I'll show you those now. So here's what the contact sheets look like when I print them out. They're 13 by 19 inches large, so they're pretty big. I use like a semi-gloss paper. It's literally just the cheapest Canon paper. And again, the printer's not too expensive, but it's amazing kind of the quality of what happens when you print out photographs. Just that there's a little bit of that sheen. Even photos that I kind of skipped over, a couple of, I love Pizza Man, but this one I skipped over. Like I didn't really talk about that one, didn't really talk about this one or this one, but they just feel really nice printed. So I find that kind of adding in that, the printed X factor a lot of times will reveal something about an image that I didn't necessarily see before. So there's some of these, some more color ones. I'll zoom in. Just even, like this one, the smoke one, I didn't really have a lot to say about it digitally, but then printed form, it just has a nice vibe. So I'll do color. I'll print in black and white as well. Here's some of the black and white. I put a little bit of blue in the highlights when I print in black and white. I think it just gives it an interesting vibe when it's on paper. And there's some of these. So, to be honest with you, these don't go anywhere. They're just really for me to finish, to kind of feel like that the project is over. So I think it's kind of an important step in feeling like the thing you did was an actual kind of, project that had a beginning, middle, and end. So this is the end, so to speak. So that is my street photography practice. One camera, one location, 1 hour, edit the photos, make contact sheets and print those photos. So I would be very curious to hear your thoughts. Is there I'm curious to hear how you react and respond to this. Do you guys have, when you guys go out and photograph, do you create these little kind of games for yourself? And then if there's anything you want to hear more about, please let me know in the comments below. I will start making more of these videos. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.